The mighty Mississippi, the father of waters, the great river, is Louisiana, and Louisiana and its people have lived their lives according to its ebb and flow. From the earliest days, American Indians, French explorers, settlers of all races and nationalities have had to respect the river and its power. Floods were an almost yearly event. They destroyed, yes, but they also replenished farmers' fields with rich river silt and refilled ponds and lakes with fish, from which many Louisianians made a living. It was the natural cycle, and people were used to it. Rather than fleeing the rising waters, many simply built scaffolds in their houses and businesses to keep their possessions high and dry. Unbelievably, small-town newspapers, with their printing presses raised in the air, continued to put out weekly editions. The Great Flood of 1927 was one of the worst, in terms of its scale and widespread destruction, but there had been bad floods in 1912, 1913, 1916, 1922, not to mention going back to the 1800s and beyond. Baton Rouge and the old state capital were fortunate. On the last ridge before the true delta begins, its riverfront landings always took water, but the town itself remained untouched by the flood. In the 27 flood, people fleeing the rising waters in the flat lands off to the west, across the river, encamped on the high ground at Baton Rouge, where the National Guard and Red Cross provided shelter, food, and health care. As a result of the big flood that year, the federal government, through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, began a massive flood control project that stretched across all of Middle America, up the Mississippi River and all the major rivers and streams that flowed into it. The Corps built dams, spillways, reservoirs, and massive levees to help channel and control the wild Mississippi. In Louisiana, the Morganza Spillway runs through the Atchafalaya, and the Bonnie Carey above New Orleans directs waters into Lake Pontchartrain. All this effort paid off in 1937. A flood even bigger than the one in 27 was, as they said back then, passed down to the Gulf. The system worked. Now, the Mississippi River Valley is faced with the biggest threat since those days. The Morganza has not been opened since 1973, almost 40 years. The Bonnie Carey was only partially opened back in 2008 to relieve pressure on the New Orleans levees, still weak from Katrina. The river, while checked, still must be respected.